It projected existentially an authentic potentiality for being whole of Dasein. Analyzing this phenomenon revealed authentic being toward death as anticipation. In its existential attestation, the authentic potentiality of being of Dasein was shown to be resoluteness, and at the same time was interpreted existentially. How are we to bring these phenomena of anticipation and resoluteness together? Did our ontological projection of the authentic potentiality for being whole not lead us to a dimension of Dasein that is far removed from the phenomenon of resoluteness? What is death supposed to have in common with the concrete situation of act? Does not the attempt to bring resoluteness and anticipation forcibly together lead us astray into an intolerable, completely unphenomenological construction, which may no longer even claim to have the character of an ontological project that is phenomenally grounded? Externally binding both phenomena together is intrinsically out of the question. There is still one way to bring these together, and this is the only possible method, namely, to start from the phenomenon of resoluteness, attested to in its existential possibility, and to ask, does resoluteness, in its almost existential tendency of being seinstendenz, itself point ahead to anticipatory resoluteness as its almost authentic possibility? What if resoluteness, following its own meaning, were brought into its authenticity only when it no longer projects itself upon arbitrary possibilities merely lying nearby, but rather upon the most extreme possibility that lies ahead of every factical potentiality of being of Dasein, and as such, more or less enters without distortion every potentiality of being of Dasein factically seized upon? What if resoluteness, as the authentic truth of Dasein, reached the certainty authentically belonging to it only in the anticipation of death? What if all the factical anticipatoriness of resolve were authentically understood, that is, existentially caught up with only in the anticipation of death? As long as our existential interpretation does not forget that the being given to it as its theme has the kind of being of Dasein, and that it cannot be joined together out of objectively present pieces into something objectively present, its steps must be guided by the idea of existence. For the question of the possible connection between anticipation and resoluteness, this means nothing less than the demand that we should project these existential phenomena upon the existential possibilities prefigured in them, and think these possibilities, through to the end, in an existential way. Thus the development of anticipatory resoluteness, as an existentially possible, authentic potentiality for being whole, loses the character of an arbitrary construction. It becomes the interpretation that frees Dasein for its most extreme possibility of existence. With this step, the existential interpretation at the same time makes known its own most methodological character. Apart from occasional, necessary remarks, we have until now deferred explicit discussions of method. We wanted first of all to proceed to the phenomena. Before exposing the meaning of the being revealed in its fundamental phenomenal content, the course of our inquiry needs to pause, not in order to rest, but in order to gain new momentum. Any genuine method is grounded in the appropriate preview of the fundamental constitution of the object, or domain of objects to be disclosed. Any genuine reflection on method, which is to be distinguished from empty discussions of technology, thus at the same time tells us something about the kind of being in the clarification of methodological possibilities, requirements, and limits of the existential analytic in general, can alone secure the transparency that is necessary if we are to take the basic step of revealing the meaning of being of care. But the interpretation of the ontological meaning of care must be done on the basis of a complete and constant phenomenological reconsideration of the existential constitution of Dasein set forth up to now. Ontologically, Dasein is in principle different from everything objectively present and real. Its content is not founded in the substantiality of a substance, but in the self-constancy, Selbstständigkeit I of the existing self whose being was conceived as care. The phenomenon of the self included in care needs a primordial and authentic existential definition, in contrast to our preparatory demonstration of the inauthentic they self. Along with this, we must establish what possible ontological questions are to be directed toward the self, if it is neither substance nor subject. The phenomenon of care, thus sufficiently clarified, can then be interrogated as to its ontological meaning. Determining this meaning will lead to the exposition of temporality. In exhibiting this, we are not led into remote, distinct regions of Dasein. Rather, we merely get a conception of the total phenomenal content of the existential fundamental constitution of Dasein in the ultimate foundations of its own ontological intelligibility. Temporality is experienced as a primordial phenomenon in the authentic being whole of Dasein, in the phenomenon of anticipatory resoluteness. If temporality makes itself known primordially here, the temporality of anticipatory resoluteness is presumably a distinctive mode of that temporality. Temporality can temporalize Zeiteigen itself in various possibilities and various ways. The fundamental possibilities of existence, the authenticity and inauthenticity of Dasein, are ontologically grounded in possible temporalizations of temporality. If the ontological character of its own being is remote from Dasein because of the dominance of its entangled understanding of being, being as objective presence, then this entangled understanding keeps it even more remote from the primordial foundations of this being same. Thus one must not be surprised if at first glance temporality does not correspond to what is accessible to the vulgar understanding as time. Thus neither the concept of time belonging to the vulgar experience of time, nor the problematic arising from it can function uncritically as a criterion for the appropriateness of an interpretation of time. Rather, our inquiry must become familiar with the primordial phenomenon of temporality beforehand, so that in terms of this we may cast light on the necessity, the source, and the reason for the dominance of the vulgar understanding of time. The primordial phenomenon of temporality will be made secure by demonstrating that all the fundamental structures of Dasein exposed up to now are to be basically conceived, temporally, with regard to their possible wholeness, unity, and development, and as modes of the temporalizing of temporality. Thus, when temporality has been exposed, the task arises for the existential analytic of repeating the analysis of Dasein, in the sense of interpreting the essential structures with a view to their temporality. Temporality itself sketches out the fundamental directions of the analyses thus required. Thus the chapter has the following divisions: anticipatory resoluteness as the existentially authentic potentiality for being a whole of Dasein, section 62. The hermeneutical situation at which we have arrived for interpreting the meaning of being of care, and the methodological character of the existential analytic in general, section 63. Care and selfhood, section 64. Temporality as the ontological meaning of care, section 65. The temporality of Dasein and the tasks arising from it, of a primordial repetition of the existential analytic, section 66.